So good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are joining us for Canadian Construction Association Connected webinar. So welcome on the special webinar that we are hosting on supply chain management, mitigating the impact of inflation. We have some fantastic panel speakers today. And to lead us off on this, by the way, my name is Kenny Leon with the Canadian Construction Association. To lead us off on this webinar is our moderator, and whom I'm handing over to, Amber Sandhu, Regional Underwriting Officer, National Accounts and Alternate Delivery for Travelers Canada. Over to you, Amber, to introduce our rest of the panel speakers.
Thank you, Kenny, and welcome everyone. We're really excited today about the panel, and we have Stephen Coote. Stephen is the president of Group 92 Mechanical and brings a great passion for kind of the business and as well as this topic. We also have Tim Sportschuetz. Tim is a general contractor turned construction lawyer, and with that background also brings a pretty unique lens to construction law. And last but not least, we have Rob Carvell with Trane Canada, and both Rob and Trane are really leaders in the HVAC industry and bring great insight for our topic today. Before we jump into the discussion, we just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. There will be some time near the end of the Q&A to address any questions. But with that, we'll maybe jump right in. Tim, Stephen, and Rob, thank you for being here. I'll start with Stephen and Tim. When we talk about construction inflation and the tension of supply and demand, can you share what you're seeing as the impact specifically as it relates to small and medium-sized companies?
Go ahead, Tim. You want to lead off?
Sure. Thank you, Amber. So what I'm seeing, especially in the last year, is really the impacts on stipulated sum agreements, of course, those that have been entered into a while ago. What's really concerning is a lot of the larger projects, the institutional projects, with stipulated price agreements going down the contractual chain. So a lot of the bigger trades will have sub agreements that are all stipulated price. And what's naturally happening, as Stephen will also discuss, is the huge price escalation that we've experienced. And the issue I'm seeing is that a lot of times owners, as well as the GCs, and those below them are reluctant to renegotiate. They will put their foot down and say, you know what, the contract says what the contract says, and we're going to hold you to that. And it's oftentimes a very difficult hurdle to overcome to pick up the phone and call these other companies or other counsel and say, look, you have really essentially two options. It's either you rely on your contract and you put these people in default. That naturally will result in 20-30% price increases because you have to reprocure everything. Or we can discuss an amicable resolution and figure out a deal to make things work. And that is the other option. And you might have to issue an extra or an EWO for 5 to 10% potentially. So you can avoid delay and significant cost increases, or you can go into the disputed territory. So I find that there's a lot of pushback still, but at times you can make these deals. As far as cost plus, there's no issue, and unit rates usually are adjusted much easier. So that's what I'm seeing. I think later we'll address particular agreements that I'm seeing more and more often, including offsite storage agreements, because a lot of SMEs want to be prepaid for a lot of the products they're buying because they're just refusing to, make upfront payments and have that stuff sitting in their yards and risk potentially not having that money flowing down to them. It puts them at severe financial risk.
So from perspective of a SME, I was probably a lot more concerned a year ago today with cost escalations. The cost escalation is there, but I believe sort of it was unpredictable, and there was no sense of rhyme or reason. I feel like it's leveling out. So for us, I mean, we were making, a year ago, we were making allowances for cost escalation in the bids and kind of trying to mitigate that risk the best we can. And in some cases, if we really couldn't sort of even lock a supplier in, that we would carry it through and, as Tim mentioned, and pass it through in the tendering side. I feel a little bit, I'd say, fast forward to today, certainly I can't say I was as confident as I was a couple of years ago that, we could predict a January 1st increase and it'd be 5%. But I'm certainly feel a little bit more confident. We are seeing a bit of leveling out. At the same time, you will have these erratic pieces, but generally, and then Tim speaks to contract language, and that's fine. But what we have found is a more collaborative approach. We're all in it together, and we're kind of stressing this, and probably private owners have a little more flexibility in that relationship. Of same idea, mitigating, where we can get you these prices, but we've got to take delivery. And so that's the caveat. Like, we can lock our price in, but this is going to be, beforehand. We don't wait till the material shows up and then send the bill in. We're having these discussions up front. And I think everybody kind of getting everybody to make sure that they all understand that we're all in it together, and we can't control these circumstances. And just simply passing risk off isn't going to be the answer either. So how do we slice this, and how can we do it together? And that approach has been good. There's been some heavy discussions at times, but I think everybody understands we're in the basket together, and we better figure a way of working it out.
Thanks, Stephen. You mentioned you're not as concerned as you were this time last year or 2 years ago. Is that related to kind of the COVID related delays, or are you kind of speaking generally, even with, there's the demand with regards to labor and other elements?
Yeah, as far as the COVID delays have just become the way of life. I take exception that it's become the ultimate excuse for everything now. Well, it's COVID, and a couch took a year. It doesn't have a chip in it. I ordered a couch, so it's become this excuse, and kind of, I think I'm trying to get at what are excuses and what are real shortages. So I have, we're starting to see, it's going to be 16 weeks, but at 16 weeks, typically it is actually showing up, or, you have that part of it. Probably, it's funny because as a business owner, then the challenge changes, because now my concern is in price increases. It's projects being, shelved because of interest rate hikes, and that uncertainty is probably the greater concern now, so that's probably where my head's at. You're still looking at trying to lock in pricing as long as we can. Our projects, they're not 5 years out. They're, maximum maybe a 2-year build, and we're able to. We feel like our suppliers are pretty good at locking those in, and no real surprises. But again, it comes down to those relationships and picking up the phone and talking about it.
Thanks, Stephen. And this one may be one for Rob and both Stephen, just in your roles. But, if you look back over the last 18 months, the concern that you had 1 or 2 years ago, but now you're sitting back 18 months later. Can you share some of those lessons learned around some of the supply constraints that you saw in your businesses, and just share the stories?
Yeah, I'll start that one, Steve. Let me hit this 2 ways, because I'm a representative of a supplier. I think somebody has to live in our world before they truly understand how our world works. We were Harvard case studies for how to run plants before this all started, for not so much COVID. COVID hurts because you have to have people on lines building equipment, but you also have to have pieces to build the equipment. So bringing those pieces from all around the world and getting to your factory, they all have to be in place at the same time in order to build that equipment. So that any piece of equipment could require 1,000 different pieces. And when they're coming from suppliers all over the world, it creates a real problem if they don't all arrive at the same time to build that product. So that was one piece of our puzzle that had to be fixed. So the first thing I'd say is plan for the unexpected and allow for change, because it's going to happen. And secondly, I'm convinced that failing to plan is plan to fail, because the plan for the unexpected, then the unexpected comes after that. So the prices on that side got increased because we started having to inventory a lot more, and then you'd have to build and not get all your parts. So that became a problem. So then we had to go out and find out, how do we fix that problem? So when you had one supplier, now you have 3 suppliers bringing in parts. So there you have options for change. So you have your options for change are good, better, best. And, you know, as a business, you have to discover what's good, better, and best for that business. So now it's no longer price dictates. It's what can I get to my factory the fastest so I can keep jobs down the pipe on time and on budget. So again, the good, better, best is you know, best might be best price, best delivery. Good might be best delivery, not so best price. So, you know, you got to weigh those and make sure your factory's still running as efficiently as it can. Second thing I'd say would be keep communication open with your customer. You know, there's always going to be conflict, but conflict's a form of communication. So open up those doors so that you're transparent and work with your customer. So, and when I say that, a lot of our people have a tendency to email and follow up with an email and follow up with an email and follow up with an email. Well, if the first one doesn't work, I don't think the second one's going to work, nor the third one's going to work. So what I use in my business is, it's called the PUF principle, and it's pick up the friggin' phone. I should tell you, in Atlantic Canada, we spell phone with an F, but it works for me. You know, when I tell people PUF, they understand what I'm talking about. And also, a fourth thing that I started doing, we all became better planners. We all became better at what we did through this whole thing. So if you know, it's a glass, you know, I take a lemon and make some lemonade here. We're sitting at the table. We're sitting at the table from day one, and we're helping our GCs and our mechanical contractors and our owners. We're sitting at that table there because we're bringing a lot to the table, and we can use lean processes to solve a lot of these problems. So those are things that as a group I've actually used and used to the extent where if I'm sitting at the table and something goes awry and you can't get something in you need in 10 weeks and now it's out 52 weeks, you go, you know, when Stephen talked about getting his couch and he didn't have a chip in it. Well, you can get electric couches now, Steve, too, and they're really nice. But if you know, sometimes you got to reevaluate and re-engineer. So I'll just give you a small example of what I mean by that. You could, you know, you're designing a new building and everyone wants to go with VRF, which is a railroad refrigerant flow, because they're simple systems and you know, they tend to work right if they're put in right, and you know, it's an easy, simple system. Well, the problem with VRF system, it's all the equipment's made in Asia. So, you know, if that becomes a problem, then and we're having a shipping issue, well, let's look at a water source heat pump and a fluid cooler and a chiller. We can do the same thing. We can save efficiencies, and, you know, maybe equal, maybe better. You know, at the end of the day, I go back to my good, better, best, and what is it? it's all North American manufactured. So that makes a difference at the end of the day to make our business just run more smoothly. So, we sell both. So I'm not saying one's better than the other. So I don't want to get emails saying, oh, you don't like this or you don't like that. That's not the case here. It's doing the best for our customer at the end of the day. So, if I can wrap it up, is we've learned to be better at our business. And as I said at the start of this, failing to plan is planned to fail. So we become better planners at our job.
So from my perspective, I actually couldn't agree more with Rob, and I'm just sort of, I think I'll give you the example of that philosophy in the sense of, so a couple of years back, we were looking at modular and prefabrication and moving in this direction. And then supply chain really caused a whole different animal for us. It was something we never dealt, you'd get the stuff shipped to the site. Now, a supplier like Rob would call and say, I have it. And we'd say, okay, ship it. We'll take it. We'll store it. We'll do whatever. But what it made us do, so two things, what kind of came out of it was that we started to see how closely, something we didn't think about. We always think of things in isolation, especially as contractors. We think of, because we're for different reasons, but when we looked at it, how closely related logistics was to this prefabrication initiative that we started. And I think that what we ended up where we say, okay, we're putting 100% behind this prefab and modular and anything we can build in the shop and then shipping out to the site. What came out of the COVID, we'll say shortages, material shortages, was it really pointed out how badly we looked at logistics. We just didn't think of it. We're not a shipping company. The reality is we are in some aspects. So we actually combined those two and realized how closely related logistics were to our prefab and how we can start to figure that out. And certainly it's had some bumpy roads in trying to get the timing right, but I'm kind of like Rob. Like I come from the school of I can't do something. No, I just haven't done it yet. And I think as Rob really pointed out nicely, is that you look at these things as opportunity to improve your business. I hate it and I love it when the business gets taxed, because it shows you where your inefficiencies are. And we have learned over the year where our inefficiencies are. So these are opportunities if you see them as such. Mind you, it's a lot of heavy lifting, but when you get through it, I think you come out the other side with that lessons learned. So I kind of echoing, the real life example of that and other ways to get to point B.
Yeah, I think you can only know how resilient your company is after it's been tested. So it's been a great time to get your business tested. I think Rob mentioned this, but I think it's important to kind of to underscore. So I might have maybe ask you as a group, but with all these pressures, how important is it to communicate and collaborate with all stakeholders, whether it's owners or others in the supply chain? How important is it to engage early?
We've probably never been more engaged because the change outside of our control has never been this sporadic. So we're engaged with our partners. Typically in the past, I did business differently because of where I'm from. I dealt with only owners. I live in New Brunswick, and I can throw a rock and hit the largest refinery in the country, and hit a shipyard that's building $60 billion worth of ships, and up the river we make a lot of French fries. And so I've done a lot of work with owners, but we've spread that out. Most of the guys that work in my office work with consultants or mechanical contractors. Now we sit at the table with our partners, and we've become partners because we have to sit at the table and decide what's best for the business of the owner at the end of the line, because that's who we're working for. And at the end of the day, I think this saves time and money for all the players. And so we really like to use a lean problem solving to solve our problems, because like Stephen said, we get used to doing things the way we were doing for so many years. Sometimes maybe we were doing it wrong. So if we step outside our comfort zone and we start using a special, let's say A3 that Toyota uses to solve their problems, and we use that 9-step problem solving to solve our problem, we all become better at what we do. So the role has become, let's say, cross-functional for all our stakeholders. So I promote early involvement in the construction for the reasons knowing the availability of the product, the probability of a price changing, the manufacturing of product, where, when, why, delivery challenges, political challenges. We're a global player, so we see globally challenges in different places. Medical challenges, we all know that COVID is, we don't like to use COVID for everything, and we've gotten to understand COVID, but 2 years ago, nobody knew what COVID was. It was this mystery disease out there that was creeping through the air. And, now we know there's many types of COVID, and don't get me wrong, COVID's been good for our business. It is, we've never been busier in the history of the company. So, we didn't start it, but we sure got involved in it. What we're doing differently now, I think, is just getting involved earlier, paying more attention to detail, and you know what? It's fun again. We're doing things differently. It got boring after a while, and now it's kind of fun again. I hate to say that, because I know a lot of people have gone through a lot of bad things, but again, let's solve the problem and move on. And it has been tough. It has been a lot of heavy lifting, but it's a fun change.
So Stephen or Tim, would you like to also opine?
Go ahead, Tim, if you want, and I'll circle back.
I've got
Okay.
other than Rob's comment about picking up the phone, I can't encourage people to do that enough. I learned that the hard way in my first job as a contractor, and my boss kept telling me, stop sending emails, go meet these people. And I can tell you right now, the clients that I do have that keep open dialogue and have proactive meetings in person and that put their cards on the table, you don't have to do it on the record. You could say to the other person, look, let's have a without prejudice call or discussion. I can just say that they avoid so many problems. Once you start sending emails and start threatening the other parties or sending nasty comments, it's already too late. You're going down a path that you likely will not be able to reverse. So I encourage everybody listening, encourage everyone on your teams to have those calls and those more personal relationships, grow those, and they'll help you hugely in any project that you're doing. And then I do the same thing with counsel on the other side. When I hear about good counsel on my files opposite, I get happy. I get excited because I know those people are reasonable and I can pick up the phone and talk to them. When I have really aggressive counsel that send me nasty emails, it never works out well for anyone. So
I guess from our perspective, with respect to engaging stakeholders, we like to wait to the end of the job and just surprise them with delays. No. I was seeing if anybody's listening. No, I think one of the things, one of the keys, we've done this kind of, we adapted this kind of plan long ago. So this is just an extension of what we were doing. It took us a while to figure it out, but now we I think the key is managing an owner's expectation. And I know Rob and lots of our suppliers and ourselves have been on the end of someone yelling, and we're sort of, I think you got to have that discussion day one, or a lot of times even when we're tendering it, we're just like, you won't get this piece of equipment. You will not achieve this schedule. And I think it gives people the opportunity to figure out plan B. And I think it's to what Tim said, it's just communicating, but I really think it's just managing expectations. And it's funny, people are scared to tell people what it is. And then they I'll use an owner or whatever, a GC is going to half coerce you to agree that you'll do better. And the reality is it's not going to be. And especially now there's certainty that if Rob tells me it's 16 weeks, it's going to be probably 18 weeks. But we tell them it's 16 weeks. Do you think you could get it earlier? You know what? I'm not going to say I'm going to try. It's not going to happen. So get that rate now. But I always come back to, construction. We build it as we go. And I think if you want to start thinking about the way Hollywood makes movies, that's the way you should be running your business. The film doesn't start turning and everything's drawn out. Every shot is planned. Everything is planned. That's what and frankly, that's what our industry needed, is that model, so that we're pre-planned to that degree. So execution is short and sweet, because if an owner starts paying on their construction costs or construction loans right away, now that's the delay. The interest is okay. Well, let's not get into the ground. Let's wait 4 months and then get into the ground, because we have all of the equipment, we have all of the loose ends put together, and it makes more sense. But I think, as everybody's saying, you want to be at the table with the owner and the GC. You cannot do this in isolation. It's not going to happen.
Conflict's not a bad word. Conflict is just communication, and it's how you use that conflict to get to the right place. So I'm happy to hear everybody's on the same mode of the communication mode, because conflict gets a bad rap about, it's in conflict. Well, conflict's just, look it up. Webster's will tell you it's just communication, and bring it to some happy place, because there's always a way to reevaluate and re-engineer. Steve and I can tell you there's multiple ways to get air through a pipe, and there's multiple things on the end of that pipe to blow the air through, and there's so many opportunities out there. It's like, okay, when do you need it? Why do you need it? How do you need it? And let's figure it. Always ask 5 whys. Why? And once we get to those 5 whys, we can figure out, okay, this is when we can do it, and this is how we can get there. It's not rocket science. It's just better planning.
Yeah, the word resolution often follows conflict too. So there is.
Did you say revolution or resolution?
Resolution. I was thinking resolution, but I both
Okay.
work. Both work, Rob.
It's interesting because tension finds balance, and tension finds efficiencies. And I think to that point, embrace it. It's okay. It's okay. We can have raise our voice a little bit or have tough discussions. That's all right. Let's just have them.
Absolutely. So that leads into my next question pretty nicely. But when we talk about stakeholder early engagement, you can't help but talk about new procurement models that we are seeing, and contractual mechanisms that could be used to help the collaboration, but also help address some of the supply chain or inflationary pressures. So I'll direct my next question to Tim specifically as our resident lawyer, but please, Rob and Stephen, feel free to jump in. What are we seeing from a procurement perspective, and in terms of contract mechanisms as well? Price escalation indexing. So what are you hearing about, seeing?
So I'm seeing a lot of trades wanting prepayments in place. They don't want to take on the risk of material, and this is directly linked to delay in projects for various reasons. I mean, you're seeing interest rates tick up. A lot of projects are either being delayed or canceled. So you're seeing a lot of these smaller trades not wanting to take on 200, 300, 400 grand worth of materials and have it sitting in their yard. And they have to front load that supplier cost. They want to discuss with the owners up front at the very early stages, or the GC, look, I need money up front, or how about you guys buy it? Here's the supplier. I've seen that happen as well, where we negotiate, where we open the lines between owner and direct suppliers on a larger purchase, and we support that transaction. So my client doesn't have to take on the risk of that huge capital outlay at the front. So that's one way to mitigate the material costs, because the labor is something we can deal with once the project starts. That work in progress is manageable. It's not manageable when you have $500,000 of materials sitting there, and then potentially another conflict arising. And then who knows what could happen? You might get terminated for whatever reason. Now you have all this material that you might not be able to use on another project, or repurpose, or even returning it might cost you 20%. So that's a big one. I'm seeing a lot of offsite storage agreements as well. That leads directly into what I just discussed. It's oftentimes dealt with during the project, I find, where a lot of the larger GCs are starting to employ this mechanism. They send trades these offsite storage agreements that say, look, if we pay you early for this material, we want to set out certain terms and conditions for those materials sitting in your yard. So that could include like title transfer, insurance obligations, inspection obligations, various different issues. What I see not being addressed enough is things like, I help a lot of steel fabricators. So offsite storage agreements will handle $1 million in purchase of steel, but what it won't discuss is what happens when a client actually improves that steel or manipulates the steel. That's labor that improves those materials. You want to get your client paid for that, even though it's happening off-site. So that's one thing where I see a lot of amendments taking place in those agreements, if you catch those issues, and it can help because you get your labor covered for those items. Project delay starts are oftentimes so severe. I've seen projects taken 6 to 12 months that were supposed to start, but now they're so severely delayed that a lot of times I'm in a spot where we can almost negotiate to say this contract isn't even valid anymore. So yes, you have, if you're lucky enough, you have a force majeure clause that you might be entitled to delay damages or delay costs. But at times my clients say, I can no longer wait on this project to kick off. What am I supposed to do? I have crews that I've allocated to this. I have other projects that are starting. So that's another major concern where I've picked up the phone and called owners or GCs, and I've told them, I said, this is now 12 months past the start date. This contract essentially is no longer valid. What do you want to do about this? So that's another thing where, early engagement is super important. Why not sit down and say, what is a reasonable start date for this project? We're already at 3 months. How long is a reasonable start date now? Can we do anything to address our concerns? And that might be locking in pricing, right? Send us some money so we can lock in the pricing with the suppliers. And then you mentioned cost escalation clauses. I find that a lot of times GCs or owners will not like those because they feel like they're taking on a lot of the risk. So one way to get around that, I find, is to get to split it with a formula that's equitable. So if you have a material heavy trade, you could say things like, I don't know, anything above 4% in 1 calendar year since procurement or since that initial quote was received, we'll split 50-50, for example. That way, if it jumps 10%, the parties split the 6% overage equally. So I find that works often better because both sides feel like, okay, I can get behind that equal share of risk. Those are, I think that's it, unless there's other questions that come up.
Thanks, Tim. I was thinking about procurement as well. We talked about kind of contract mechanism, but either Rob or Stephen can also maybe jump in. but what are we seeing from a kind of a procurement or model change?
I'm seeing greater flexibility. I don't know, maybe because of my age, I've become a better negotiator. I don't know, but it's just the flexibility is there because the availability is not there. There's something called global warming that's happening all around us, and there's data centers that are being built all over North America because they're moving out of Asia to come to a greener climate, and particularly Quebec, where they have a lot of green electricity, and you hear the local buzzwords of carbonizations and decarbonizations and on and on and on for green power, and it's creating so much business that the flexibility to negotiate is much easier lately. That's what I'm experiencing in my business. Maybe I'm very fortunate in the business I'm in, or there's a trust issue that's happened, that we will deliver when we ask, but we got to sit at the table so we get there. So I don't really want to get into negativity on legal sides or with my customers. I want them to win and I want to win. So yeah, that's what I've been seeing. Procurement's been much easier and much better. It's not price driven anymore. It's a different world we're living in, and I like it.
And sorry, Amber, I think the construction management model is picking up speed a bit more since about 2 years. So if that's more to your question, I think even if you have a pretty well-defined scope, a lot of times I see owners going the CM route with a project because they still want early design input from their party managing their projects. So what I'm seeing a lot is the 5A, the CCDC 5As are being used with CCDC 17s flowing down to the trades, rather than the traditional CCDC 2 model and then CCA 1s below them. So that is one thing where it is becoming more common. Early stakeholder involvement is seriously increasing. That is a major change I've noticed.
A lot of future hedging too. You're hedging on what it's going to be, a year from now as opposed to now, and being careful. If you're not careful, your business could suffer drastically. So it's a concern for all of us. So that's, you get into these price escalation clauses, one has to be very careful on what to accept and what not to accept.
So there's a couple points that have been raised, and Amber, I'll start with on this topic. You asked about procurement. So the procurement model. So in my opinion, and we've already touched on it. So yeah, construction management with as a case where mechanical is a big component, especially the HVAC equipment and such, and that's where there's been problems with deliveries and chips and all that, right, and the rest of it. So when I look at that, I think if I'm looking at a procurement model as an owner, I would be looking at a design build or CM with a GC or a construction manager, and design build the mechanical and electrical. And Rob touched on this earlier. There's different ways to heat and cool a building. So you bring in the contractor, or that early involvement in it allows us to look at the variations of different design. So I go to Rob and say, hey, Rob, I'm looking at this here, and this here. Oh, well, fan coil units are made in North America. We have a greater control over that, or they have less of chips, or they have this, or this is an easier for us to get. Okay, then we can go back to an owner with an option to say, you have A, B, or C. This is the one we like, but there's uncertainty. We have potentially this type of equipment, but we have cost certainty and we have delivery certainty. And this should answer, that should have answered your question, John Boxtel, that you typed in. But so that's one aspect of it. Then the other part that we kind of touched on and we wandered a bit away from is really comes down to, once we are purchasing, what have you seen? And to Rob's point, flexibility for sure, because we're all in it. They're trying to build a building, and this idea of we're just passing risk to whoever will take it. Nobody needs to do that anymore. Nobody's willing to do that. So how do we get there collectively? So what is interesting for us is that, back to my first point, where we're taking in boiler systems and we're pre-building a mechanical room well in advance of when that mechanical room is required on the retirement home. And we've engaged the owner or the construction manager, which is a nice relationship to allow that to happen, where we say, look, we can start building this. We have the boilers, we can lock in price, we're going to build it, but we need you to pay for it. Okay, sure. But this is not something owners are used to, is equipment sitting in my shop that they've paid for, and that's sitting here and I've added components to it and improved the value. And that whole issue, as Tim said, who owns it? What's the improvement? What's the real improvement? What are lien rights? What are all of those things? And I think most people just haven't got their head around that piece, because we're just trying to get the building built. But I do think that there's room for us not to work out legal dialogue, but this aspect of ownership, insurance. Like, I found myself, I'm renewing my insurance, and I'm like, okay, this is a good question. This came to me now, and now I'm shipping it out. So Trane ships it to me. I take it. They've done their piece. Who's responsible now when I take that equipment, put it on my flatbed, and ship it to the site? Am I adequately covered in insurance? And I think that's a question the contractors should be thinking about, is because as you start to change that model up, there's different risk exposure that we're not ready for yet. In the case of our owner, in a couple of owners now, they've been flexible because they just need to get the work done, and want to. So everybody kind of looks past the contract language and typical how things were done and go, how are we going to do it? Would this be suffice? We'll put a sign on it that says this is the property of XYZ Incorporated now. Take a picture of it. They come down to our shop, inspect it. Like, this is a different animal. So I think there's some room to go in there. And I'm not going to say contract language is to protect when the wheels fall off, but I think some best practices in and around that, there's some work to be done, because I don't think we've figured that out yet.
That's a great point, Stephen. I think the contract language really is a reflection of the behaviors, and the behavior is getting more collaborative. And I think that's a great thing, but it also, the accountability becomes a little less clear as it was before, because it's not as binary of who owns this risk or who doesn't. It's a great comment. So really the last question I have before we open up to questions, and some of them already may have been answered, but this one's for all of you really, but as business owners, when you gaze into your crystal ball, what's the lasting impact of the last few years on the industry? It's a tough one, so I don't know who wants to take it first.
Well, we're never going back to where we were. Life has changed, and I believe that we've become much more resilient to change. It hit us right in the head right at the start, but our ability to think on our feet has been enhanced, and therefore we will be better for this experience. And we've learned a lot of things. We've learned to work in tighter spaces and do better things. So I believe all good business will survive, and will be a better experience for it. So, I think we also learn not to avoid conflict and communicate. And, again, if you didn't get anything out of this, take the puff principle away.
I'll second that. I think a lot of solid relationships were built throughout the last 2 years. And I think those relationships are going to, this is obviously geographically constrained, but I know, in the lower mainland, I mean, you have relationships that were created through the pick up the phone principle that are going to last and create some really, really great future relationships and innovation in the industry between companies. I don't know if that would have happened before. I think although COVID made us more distant, I think people did pick up the phone more often because you had to, that you needed nimble people to just figure out what to do. I'm really encouraged to see that. A lot of people have created some really, really great relationships. And I think those people who don't have personal relationships are really going to struggle in this future world, because we are slowing down. I think we're going into some tough times the next year. So I think the lessons learned over the last 2 years are going to be really important.
I'm not sure. I like to think, and it's funny, there's a lot of questions in the questions and people have typed in about collaboration. There's lots of that. And that's what we see. The question will be whether that continues, because right now, all things being equal, people will collaborate because they have to survive. I like, as I said, I'd rather this type of relationship. It's much better. It's certainly nicer to go to work like that. I hope it continues. We're certainly creatures of habit, and soon we'll forget and go back. The second part is that I'm really curious if supply chains have really changed, in the sense that that's here to stay. This idea of, like, when you want a car, you're going to order it 6 months in advance. My feeling is that if it improves the bottom line for any of these companies, then that will be the method going forward. And that would be a great question for Rob, is that if his bottom line improved because of that, then we're going to see a difference in procurement where, if you're thinking about building a building, you're going to have to come out way in front of it. And then can they, because there's other uncertainties that kick in, so this idea of how the planning goes about, and that, we're going to be building, you better order it now. This is the conversations we're having with owners. If you want it now, it's a year delivery for a customized piece of equipment. You need to order it now or you will not get it. So that'll be interesting whether that sticks. And my feeling is you always follow the money, because if there's more money to be made in that model, then that's what will stick. That's my,
That's funny you say that, because whenever I'm going for a project, that's my first question is, who's got the money? Because if they don't have any money, I don't go any further. I can answer. I think I can answer some of your question there, but the supply chain is real. The supply chain is real. It got backed up, and now it's real. And because there's so much business out there, our backlog is double what it would have been this last year. So when do you build new plants? How do you work around this backlog? And there's no people to put in the space. That's the hardest part. Now I can get the material. I still have to have people to build it. I have to have quality people to build it. And then, that gets price driven, because everybody needs people to build their products, whether it's HVAC equipment or cars or fridges or stove, whatever it is. They all have to be built, and it all takes people to build it. So I think we're going to move more towards robotics. That's got to be part of the equation. We're going to move towards better ways of building things. Stephen mentioned a boiler in a building. Now we have a chiller that's also a boiler. This in the last 2 years, we've created a chiller that can also be a boiler. So you can get 180-degree water from a chiller. Well, that was unheard of 3 or 4 years ago, right? Now you can do that. So you got the chiller and the boiler in one piece of equipment. Amazing. So the innovation that's come from all the bad stuff that's happened here is a beautiful thing. So the future looks great, and somebody said, are we going to sit at the table more? Absolutely. This is a good thing. This is working. It's working better than ever before. You know, you sit at the table, you discuss it, you're part of the solution, not part of a problem of not getting these jobs done. So absolutely. And be more collaborative. Absolutely. We got to be more collaborative. We got to talk to one another. We got to communicate, and we got to be honest with one another. You know, trust is the most important thing when we're building these structures that we have to build. I think it's a good path.
One of the things, Amber, I just wanted to add, we talk about crystal ball, and that's great in the sense of what we feel. But one of the things too, and if people aren't familiar, maybe I just come to the party late all the time. But one of the things I found was the Global Supply Chain Stability Index, which I think is, you know, and this is global, but here's the measurement of the overall volume of goods that are being shipped, the speed at which the goods are being shipped. And this takes into account the geopolitical pressures, you know, not just COVID, but this is really interesting. You start to look, and you can go, you know, look at, take a look at the index, and you can see where the chaos begins and how people behave, how pricing and the price inflation relation to this here model is very interesting. So if people haven't seen that, just check it out. It's kind of good reading in that sense, and you can see why we're in the state we are. The question is where this index goes. Are we moving downward? And you know, lately we're starting to head down, but is it just temporary? Is it just a ripple? As Rob said, we have different issues with labor and some of these things. But I just think this is another tool besides that crystal ball to look at that may provide some guidance, because there is some. It would appear that there's some correlation to inflation when you start to look at that pricing. The index, the supply chain stability index. So just wanted to add that piece.
Thanks, Stephen. I think we have a couple of questions, but to be honest, you might have already answered all of them. Kenny, is there anything that we haven't answered already in the questions?
No, I think you pretty much asked in terms of collaboration and everything else that came in as the questions as well. So I don't necessarily see anything per se. So I think in respect of everybody's time as well, we have just 5 minutes to 3 actually. So unless, of course, last call, if anybody has a question, you can type it in.
Last call, guys. If there's any questions, let us know. Or if there's any additional elaboration needed on any of these questions.
Stephen's always the last guy at the party because he was in the library studying. That's why.
Actually, it was.
Good for you.
So also the last guy in the bar. There were some questions that did come through. John Boxtel, no, it's not snowing in Niagara. Yeah, that's a question he would have for me. There were some questions that came through, and again, it really dealt with a lot of collaboration, which is really interesting. Collaboration, and maybe we should start looking at the tools that allow that collaboration, and maybe our approach, as Rob said, you know, and I do think procurement in a lot of ways can be some of these answers. And of course, I'm partial to design build because I think that it does do this. I think it does. I think it did it anyways. I think it's even more vital now in that sense. And what do you got to lose? So in that sense, like people that haven't used a design build model or a version of it, you know, the other way's not working. So I think it does leverage.
And one other part, yes, or can we reverse engineer the M&E design budgets from the manufacturer's end? Anything's possible. So yeah, I did a presentation to, I can't remember who it was in the last couple of weeks, but you know, I reevaluate and re-engineer and reverse all the time. You know, it's the 3 R's, right? Read and write, risk, but it was, for me, it was reverse, reevaluate, and re-engineer.
Yeah, just good business to relook at everybody's processes. So I think we're coming to the end of the hour then, and I want to thank all of you, Rob, Tim, and Stephen for sharing your perspectives. It's trite to say, but these are unusual times, so being able to share stories and ideas can help us all. So thank you very much.